So what we want to start off with, really, I think the first question I'd like both of you to answer is around the value proposition. Why is diversity and inclusion important in your organization, and why are you as leaders passionate about it?
Well, I'll start. So there are a couple of reasons for it. I think the most obvious is that it's the right thing to do for both business and community and personal reasons. But, you know, in our world, there's a pretty significant business imperative and moral imperative. And the moral imperative is the fact that in the world of healthcare, I work at university hospitals, obviously, in the world of healthcare, study after study has shown that people who need care will seek care when people who look like them provide that care. And that may come as news to you, but perhaps not. And so for us, it's an important component of who we are in order to allow us to meet our mission, which is to heal, to teach, and to discover. So aside from the community issues and the individual issues, the professional issues, there's this real key component that we need to make certain we're taking care of the healthcare needs of everyone in our community, regardless of who they are, regardless of their socioeconomic status, or regardless of their race. Great.
That's a parallel sense for us. I would guess everyone in this room has got a strategic plan of some kind, and I'd be very surprised if one of the key elements of that strategic plan doesn't address talent. And this issue of diversity and inclusion is really fundamental to the talent issue. And so regardless of what your specific product strategy is or how you serve an individual marketplace, you need the best people. You need access to all people of all backgrounds and life experiences. And that's really where we find the power around the whole inclusion and diversity issue within our company. It drives what I call a full contact game. Every day people are out recruiting, trying to get the best people, trying to keep the best people, trying to develop people. But it's more than simply having different people in the workplace. It's also having different people in the workplace understand and appreciate and respect the perspectives and life experiences of others. And we actually think that's the more difficult portion of this whole issue of diversity and inclusion. You can put very different people in a room, but getting a work product or a talent product that comes out of that that's even better than the individuals, that's the atmosphere and the whole culture of inclusion that takes every bit as much work as simply the recruiting and embracing of different people and different experiences.
Great. Brian, I know you're asking the questions, but the slide that you showed before, the purpose of the debate today, I want to actually encourage you to insert another clause, and you talked about the shared best practices. I really think, where possible, we should be prepared to share our strategies and our strategic plans and our best practices, because I think we're all colleagues, right? We're all in this together, and this is really important for the world in which we live. And so for those of us who would be willing to share, I think that there's a lot to be learned from what other organizations are doing in terms of the whole idea of diversity and diversity strategic planning.
Thank you. Yep, I agree. So with that, one of the places that strategy starts at is at the board. And I'm interested to know from both of your organizations, how involved is your board in diversity and inclusion, and how do they monitor how the organization is doing?
Start, Tom?
Sure. Well, as I look out over the audience this morning, it looks like almost half of my board members are here. So, good morning, and I hope I get this right.
And feedback is good.
And feedback is good, right. You know, we started our journey about 10 or 11 years ago and worked hard on the whole concept of diversity and inclusion at the senior-most level, and that's at the policy level of our board. And we made a conscious effort in which to do it. Now, you know, this is almost a setup question by some measures for Brian, because Brian serves as the vice chair of our governance committee, who helps us to find and source potential board members to serve on our board, and Brian's done a fabulous job at that. And we continue to do the kinds of things that we need to do to be active in this regard. You might have noticed we were recognized, I guess it was last year, for the Hall of Fame for the recognition that we've done in terms of board diversity and inclusion, and we've worked very diligently at it. It's been an important part of our chair, starting with Chris Connor, who was the first chair of my board when I first arrived here. Henry Meyer was the original chair for 2-3 months, but then Chris took over. Then went to Monty Ahuja, who was very interested in diversity, now Al Rankin. So board leadership, board engagement has made an enormous difference for us, and we work very, very diligently across our whole system, because we have, I just went through this yesterday, we have 55 boards that exist across our entire health system, and there's a lot of need for diversity and inclusion across our entire system. And it's quite frankly a matter of looking deeply into the community to find the right people who represent us. We are a regional provider. We do not seek national board representation, so we look hard in the communities that we serve for that representation, because for the work that we do, our mission is quite frankly to heal, to teach, and to discover. We're there to take care of the needs of the people who we serve in the local communities that we serve, so getting that board representation and diversity and inclusion in each of our communities is so critically important. It's not easy. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of energy, it takes a lot of work, and I'm sure Sandy will say this, I'll probably say it later, but looking is just a box-checking exercise. It's not just looking, it's finding. And that's the key, and that's the trick.
Sandy?
Yeah, I think parallel objectives, little different process. As you know, we're a global company and we do business in 175 countries, and so we're looking for board members who really have relevant global experience, and that makes this challenge of diversity and inclusion just kind of another step, because there's the whole global piece that goes with it. But as you step back from it, again, it's a talent issue. We use what I think most companies use in terms of a contemporary approach to assessing skills needed on a board. It's a skills-based assessment recruiting process. It's something we really espouse from the Business Roundtable for all businesses, that you look at your strategic plan, you look at the forward challenges that your organization is going to experience, try to identify what necessary skills you need against that, and then people's performance, board members' performance, is assessed against that every year, because you really serve on a board really only at the interests of the shareholders, and it's got to be relevant going forward, not just what someone's done in the past. Having done that, our board today is 25% females, 25% minority. Those recruiting processes to accomplish the objectives of all the different experiential backgrounds and viewpoints we want obviously is a very detailed one. Takes up to 2 years, 2.5 years to find a board member through the process we go through. As you can imagine, there are all sorts of conflicts that can occur between schedules and competitive companies and competitive marketplaces. So board search in large for-profit organizations is a real challenge. However, you have to start with the provision of what skills do we need, what backgrounds, and we want our board very much to be setting the pace, and they do, for our inclusion and diversity. We have formal board committees that review several times a year how we're doing in line of businesses and geographies in terms of our talent recruitment, and a very important portion of that talent recruitment, advancement, and development is around inclusion and diversity. We have global and regional inclusion and diversity councils. They're supported by ERGs that are out there, and 3 of them that we've got working around the world today. Very fundamental work with hundreds of employees involved in them. That all really reinforces the work from the top of the organization to the bottom of the organization, that we think talent's the most important thing we do, and the dimension we have to keep getting better on in talent is diversity and inclusion.
Thanks, Sandy. So, Tom, to your point about sharing strategies and not just best practices, and Sandy, you just started into a bit of your strategy. Would you like to share some of the strategy at UH around this topic?
Around board diversity or just in general?
Just in general.
Just in general. So a few things. You know, we started this back, as I said, about 10 years ago. And we always had a chief diversity officer. And we had terrific chief diversity officers. But we came to the conclusion that we really needed to make this more of a mainstream initiative rather than just giving someone a title, a portfolio, and expectations. So we've broken our strategies up now into 4 different domains. The first is people, the second is community, and the third is supplier. Now, I know I mentioned 4, and the reason why the 4th was silent is because we break our people up into 2. So we have our physician component, which is an important component of the work that we do, and we also have our non-physician component. So when we think about diversity, we look at all 4 of those domains. So I'll just speak briefly to all 4. I'll start with the physician community. There are very few minority physicians in medical school today. I see that there are some people representing a number of medical schools here in the audience, and I think that they would agree. The number of women in medical schools now is over 50%, so we're seeing a lot of gender diversity, but we're not seeing a lot of racial diversity. So having said that, we made it a goal going back to 2004, 2005, that we would do a lot of things to attract and recruit the best and brightest minority medical students to have experience at UH from across the country, so that as they're looking for residencies, that they would consider us. So we've done something that we call the David Satcher Clerkship. So we invite around 30 or 40 medical students from around the country to have experience with us over the summertime, so that they'll get to understand Cleveland, they'll get to understand Northeast Ohio, they'll get to understand our organization and our community. And that becomes a pipeline for us to make sure that we're going to be finding the best and brightest to fill our residency slots. But we do far more than that as well. We have a number of other leaders and mentors in medicine who work in the minority community to make certain that we're going to be doing our best to attract and retain those who are looking to become physicians from all across the country. So we go through something called the National Residency Match Program, and that occurs in March every year. But the number of minority medical students across the country is far less than 10%. So a lot of work to be done in that regard. And I'm pleased to say that we are at 2 times the national average for the work that we do in finding diverse physician candidates who are in our teaching program. That's the good news. But we all remember from Statistics 101 that figures don't lie, but liars can figure, right? So we're far greater than the national average. In fact, we're double, but it's about 6%. So when you think of the absolute number, it's de minimis. And I think we have to really work at making that pool of candidates far larger than we've done before. On the employee side, Cindy referenced the employee resource groups. We do that as well. We have people who work within our organization to make certain that we're engaging our employees at every level and frankly every domain that we possibly can. We have a lot of employee resource groups that work across our entire health system. But we also want to make certain that we're creating the next generation of leader and giving people the opportunity to do well by joining our organization. So for example, we have a very strong mentoring program. 41% of the people in our mentoring program are from minority or diverse populations. And these are people learning to become managers or directors or to move up the organizational chart. And so we've been working at that now for about the past 3 years, and it's really paid some dividends. Likewise, we also put together something called the University Hospitals Leadership Academy. We took 28 of our best and brightest, and we're putting together the opportunities for them to grow and develop in our organization. And about 30% of the people in that program, half are physicians, half are non-physicians, and about 30% of those people are from diverse backgrounds as well. So we've made a conscious effort to make that happen. In fact, we did our first class about 4 years ago, and at the urging of the first class, we did UH Leadership Academy 2.0. So we have 28 more people going through that program. And I'm pleased to say that of that first class of 28, 10 have now been promoted after 2.5 years to additional roles and broader responsibility within our organization. On the community side, we've done a lot. We've worked with a number of community organizations, Newbridge, for example, Evergreen Cooperatives. We've done a lot to make sure that we're both investing in our community as well as investing intellectual capital into our community. So we've worked diligently at that. And then in terms of the whole idea of supplier diversity, in the past 10 years, we've spent almost $500 million on supplier diversity initiatives. And we think it's a moderately, pardon me, it's a moderately successful program, but we can always do better. You may remember not too long ago we did something called Vision 2010, so it's about 4 years old now, but as part of Vision 2010, which is a $1.2 billion program, we focused on the needs of female business enterprises, minority business enterprises, and local spend. And we set goals and objectives in those various domains. I'm pleased to say that we set a 5% target for female business enterprises, 15% for minority, and 80% local spend. And at the conclusion of that roughly $1.2 billion spend, we were at 7.5% minority female business enterprises, 17% minority business enterprises, and 93% of that was local spend. But again, deductive thinking, linear thinking, measurable objectives, and we think we made a difference. Now the reason I go through all that with you is because in each of those 4 domains, we no longer have just one chief diversity officer. It may surprise you, Margot Copeland used to be the chair of our diversity committee of our board, and she and I had a lot of conversations about the role of the chief diversity officer. Hilton Smith subsequently took that responsibility, and we came to the conclusion that we didn't need a minority filling the role of chief diversity officer. So our chief diversity officer is a man named Steve Stanley, Caucasian man, who's very dedicated, very committed to the idea of diversity, and he's now spread responsibility for each of those 4 domains to individuals and groups who help to lead this strategy. So it's not as if we have an individual with a line of responsibility. We now have a group of people with broader responsibility across our entire system.
If I just maybe add a couple of comments, and I think you get the impression, obviously, from Tom's comments, I'll try to add to them, that it's not one thing that's going to make a difference in your enterprises. And as you really think through the process of changing your ability to attract and maintain and embrace the best talent, you're going to have to work on a lot of initiatives, and not all of them will work right off the basis. So this is patient, long-term work. It's like investing capital. You're investing in talent. And I'll give you just a couple of examples that I think we would parallel. Tom talked about. We used to look very, very hard at how we were doing in terms of recruiting incoming talent, in terms of looking at the diversity statistics. We still do. The more important statistic, however, is how good are you as an organization in terms of retaining that talent. And what you'll find, I think, and I'm sure so many of you already have, is there are informal filters within your organization that you can't even see in yourself in terms of the way you do business, the things you talk about, the way your business is structured, And it goes on and on and on. And really thinking through those subtleties in your workplace will have a lot to do with your ability to maintain talent that comes from a different life experience than you did perhaps yourself. I was thinking about the example as I was driving over here this morning, and I don't think you'd mind me saying so, but every time I send my son an email, I'm lucky if I get a response in 8 to 12 hours. If I send him a text, I get a message in less than 20 seconds. Drives me nuts. I can't understand the difference. They're both on the they're both on the same phone. They're half an inch apart, but they are a world apart. And it's an indication in a very small way that our own life experiences create expectations for behavior, how we do things, how we communicate. Yet many others don't think that way. And you've got to think of how you get at that issue in your workplace, because it's so important after you do all the good work of trying to set up your recruiting programs and embracing talent from around the world and of different backgrounds. If you're losing them 3 years later, you've just spent a lot of money and you're getting nowhere. Don't give up. Just recognize you're starting to peel the onion back one more level, and you're starting to try to understand that the life experiences of so many of your colleagues are maybe very different than the talent you're attracting today, and you've got to find a way to open people's heads in that respect. I'd say secondly, and Tom mentioned the issue of facilities, you can have an enormous impact in your organization if you look where you spend money. So regardless whether this is on your supplier program for direct and indirect materials, really thinking through who are your suppliers today, how do you make your supply chain accessible to new firms? Often that means you've got to cut down the size of the bids, because a small firm that's starting up isn't going to be in a position to bid on a $10 million contract. But perhaps if you cut your bids down to $50,000 or $100,000, if you assist them in their bonding process, they're going to be in a position where they can start to get access and experience. Our facility, which is just up the street here, 44% of the awards went to minority firms. That didn't just happen. That happened by a program that really was led by Deborah Pickens, who's here and you'll hear from later today, over many years thinking through a process of how could we make many of those bids that we expected to be highest quality, on-time delivery, and really meet with the full architectural plans. How could we get those bids down to relevant size for individual suppliers where they can make a difference? And we had terrific performance from those firms. Also, how could you get those firms to embrace thinking about their own diversity? So when we're talking about just buying from them, we're also talking about how we could get them to think very differently in a number of our trades here locally about employing people of very different life experiences and giving them the opportunity on our job to get some experience that would allow them then to go on in their own careers. So the further you get down on this, I think you'll find is this is not a one-step process. This isn't something that's going to happen over 1 or 2 or 3 years. Your organizations will have wonderful successes, and they're going to have some heartbreaking disappointments, but it's long-term work. And I would say that if there's one big takeaway I would hope you take away from today, it's that you're probably going to hear a lot of great ideas and a lot of great strategies. Pick a couple you're going to focus on and decide to make a difference and put the measurable results around them. We feel very strongly that setting specific goals really help an organization move things ahead. It also helps your organization celebrate when you're really doing well on these issues. And don't be afraid to get pretty specific on your goals and the programs you're personally going to have accountability in the next 12 months. When your organization sees that you as the leader are going to hold people accountable and you're going to share the risk in terms of the programs and strategies you're going to try, I would bet the likelihood of success is going to elevate greatly within your organizations.
Brian, if I could pick up on one point Sandy raised. I think when Sandy was talking about supplier diversity, the word I would think of is vigilance and commitment. And it's not easy, and it is a journey. And he's right, it's not a one-step process. So for example, when we did the same thing, we found that a lot of individuals in small firms were not using accrual accounting. They were doing cash accounting. They didn't know how to apply for a loan to a bank. They didn't understand how they needed to think through the bigger picture of how to handle a payroll. And it was sort of stunning in some of the simplicity that we had to figure out. So Steve Stanley, again, the person who led this initiative, pulled a group of banks together and said, we have to have educational programs for people who want to bid on our projects. We had to talk with people about hiring practices. We had to help a number of various firms really get a better understanding on how best to work in a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week environment. We have very special codes in hospitals that you need to understand if you're going to work within our environment. So we had training sessions for people who are going to be bidding on projects on how best to work in environments of that nature. But it takes more than just saying, these are the requirements that we need. These are the skill sets you must demonstrate. In a lot of instances, we had to provide them. And Sandy mentioned bonding. We had a number of potential contractors who went through and were able to get lines of credit and did the things that they needed to do to hire the right people, but they couldn't get bonded because they had no experience. Well, we happen to own our own offshore malpractice captive insurance company. We came to the conclusion that we would create our own bond company to bond contractors who are going to be working on our project. So you have to go that extra step, because Sandy's right, as you begin to peel away the various levels, you find that there are a number of steps you're going to have to take to really be an enabler as an employer, not simply someone who's going to be seeking people who are looking to work on your projects. And then lastly, I would say that I think all of us together need to work on the following thing. We need to take today's ceilings and make them tomorrow's floors. So the work that we're going to be able to do in diversity and inclusion have to become the floors of tomorrow, not the ceilings of today, because unless we work on this together, we're not going to see the kind of progress that I think we need to see across the country.
Well, you both make fantastic points. They don't need much prompting, but I want to dig a little bit deeper. So we talked a little about strategy. We've talked about your board. You've given us some really great insight and moved all the way into supplier diversity before I could get there. But how do you get your team on board? How do you make your team as passionate about this as I hear both of you are?
You know, I actually think it's not a very complicated subject, and you've got to be able to create the burning platform that people can identify with. And I honestly think the easiest platform for people to identify with is the great force multiplier in any organization, any community, or any country is talent. And if you're going to have the best talent in a global setting, you've got to have the best access to talent wherever it is, of whatever background. And unless you can capture that talent, as I said before, and put it into an inclusive environment, you're never going to get the multiplicative advantage of having those people learn from one another. So if your organization really believes what's going to determine your success is whether you're successful in this war for talent, to use an overused phrase, then you've got to embrace and excel and achieve in the area of inclusion and diversity. It's not simply about, and I think the reason this subject didn't move for so many years is it was simply a social argument. And unfortunately, there are many people in business who don't respond simply to a social argument. When it becomes a societal issue and a business issue, and it hooks together, and that intersection is where talent and community strength comes together, it is a really powerful driver. And helping your teams understand what was in that famous book that talked about Workplace 2000. This was back in 1990, that talked about the need for organizations to get their head around inclusion and attracting best talent. We're a long time since 1990, and these trends have become even more relevant. And so one only has to look at where talent is today, and it isn't going to look like it did 35 years ago. So organizations better get moving or they'll get left behind. I think it's a really powerful platform.
So how do you translate that into supplier diversity? So is it...
Same thing's true there. I mean, obviously the talent is joining organizations, and not every organization is going to be, that's successful is going to be the one that was successful 30 years ago. And so you really need to find ways to capture that. And Tom knows, when we started the Economic Commission, you know, one of the big issues for Northeast Ohio was that this is a very diverse region. However, we've not made our diversity a source of economic strength. And that was really the big charge we were after at that point. And why hadn't we been able to move Northeast Ohio in the previous 50 years? That argument had never been made on an economic basis. It was always made on a societal issue. And yes, there are a lot of people who will respond to the societal issue, but frankly, there are a lot of people who will sit on the sideline until they say, what's in it for me? The real big awakening, I think, for many of us was that we could unite this region around the issue of converting our our diversity and the tremendous diversity we have in this region into a source of economic strength. That's a lever not many regions have. I think it's true for companies, I think it's true for nonprofits, I think it's true for the region, and frankly, it's a big issue for this country at this point, and we've got to get our heads about how we convert that into economic strength.
Great. Great. Tom, did you want to add on the supplier diversity side and how you get your team on board?
Yeah, so to reversing the questions, how to get the team on board, that's never been an issue for us, and I think that that's the strength of our organization. It's never been questioned. In fact, it's something we think about and we talk about all the time. So that's something that I think is ingrained into the fabric of our organization. We feel very confident and comfortable in the work that we've done in this regard. But I will tell you, Brian, as well, I think we have to admit our shortcomings. And if you look at my senior leadership team, we're not a particularly diverse group. If you look at Sandy's team, he is a diverse senior leadership team, and we work and we think about this a lot. Not an easy task, but something we need to do. On the physician side, our department chairman, our leadership of our medical center, Case Medical Center, not a very diverse group. And this is something that we're continuing to work on. So we keep it in the front of everyone's mind, but we have to make sure that we're making a difference there. When it comes to things like employee resource groups and ground level activity, we work it across our entire health system, and I think we work it rather well. We can always do better. And to Sandy's point, I think it's important to make sure that we have deliverables that are clearly identified that everybody buys into. But quite frankly, our group is far more interested in working collectively to set those goals than having an individual, specifically me, saying this is where we need to go. Mm-hmm. Supplier diversity, I think, is something that we have to work more on in the years to come as well. You know, when we did our big building program, it was relatively straightforward, but as I mentioned to a number of people, that was a point-in-time event. Mm-hmm. So our building program took place over a 5-year period of time. Now it's really about supplier and continuing business diversity. Mm-hmm. And that's something that we have been working through with Steve. We have an individual responsible for it, and it's something that we will continue to focus on in the years to come.
You both have touched on this already, but I'd like to just get a little bit more. Joe said in his opening comments how important this is to the region. Sandy, you talked about we haven't taken advantage of our diversity in terms of economics. If I'm a CEO of a growing company, maybe not as large as either of your organizations, facing all the challenges day to day just to beat my competition, satisfy my customers, why am I thinking about this regionally and saying it's important too that I have this as part of my strategy?
Well, I would start, I'm sure Tom can add to it. I think enterprises exist for many different reasons. And I think in this debate that's gone on since the mid-90s to now, when we went all the way toward the heavy orientation to simply shareholders' value, then to a lot of balanced discussions around societal contribution, and then more recently, tremendous focus upon employee welfare. Every one of us knows it's not one of the three. Organizations exist in a complex way for many ways in terms of how they interact with communities, with their families of employees, with their stakeholders, would be they shareholders, customers, or suppliers. And the answer is you got to balance them all. It's not simply one, and life's just not that simple. And so I would come back again to the issue of this fundamental issue of offering people across a community or society an opportunity to achieve. Means that whether it's a for-profit or a non-for-profit organization, the individuals that attract the very best talent and create the very best culture are going to be the place where, guess what, the great talent wants to go and be there. And you're going to either create, you're going to innovate, you're going to deliver, you're going to make huge impacts in your community. But it's solely dependent upon that issue of whether you've really got the best talent. And that's why I keep coming back to that issue. This is a very easy subject, I think, to help people access. If you can get them built around the issue, how are you going to assure you've got the best talent and you're allowing them to reach their fullest potential and they're able to make a huge impact in the communities for the families that they're parts of.
And I think as well, when you use the business example, I think it's important to transcend just the pure business model in the work that we do. There are a tremendous number of community resources out there that I think all of us as employers need to take advantage of. We did this program called Step Up to UH, and we use a lot of community assets, not-for-profit organizations who are in the community who are funded to help, at the very basic level, to help better screen people and prepare them for interviews in our organization. We get 12,000 to 15,000 applications per month for people who want to work at university hospitals. That's roughly 150,000 people a year we get applications for. By the time we screen through and work through that applicant pool, it's not inconsequential. It's a tremendous amount of work, right? But we teamed up with a couple of community organizations, and they go into communities of the underserved, and they help people to get prepared to interview, to help them through the very basic elements of what it's like to get a job, and they do a lot of the advanced work for us. So as an employer, where we would have 500 applicants for a position in, let's say, food service employment, Step Up to UH, by working with these number of community organizations, we'll now have 1 to 2 qualified candidates for every position that's available. So I think we need to think about how we're going to be better engaging with the community. You can do well by doing good. And the resources are out there. Granted, they're somewhat limited, but as employers, we need to be prepared to step into the community and say, what's out there to help people, as Sandy ended his comments, how can we better advantage people and their families to not only get a job, but to keep a job? So not only do they help us screen people who are potential employees, but more importantly, they serve as a lifeline many times for people who need an advisor. So there are community agencies out there who will work with people who don't know what to do when their child is sick and they're going to miss 2 days of work, but they don't know enough to call in to tell their employer that they can't make it to work, that they missed the bus that day. I mean, a lot of very basic social skills that I think we take for granted. But I think at every level, Sandy talked about sort of the premier roles within the various organizations, and appropriately so. We talk a lot about the board, but at a very basic elemental level, we have to make certain that we're giving everyone equal opportunity to perform well if they have the drive, desire, and the ambition to do so.
Great. I called it audible up here, Josie. You said we could text the sidelines without getting suspended, so I gave a signal over here. We're going to take a couple of questions. We've got about 9 minutes, I think. Luis is over here, has a microphone. Any questions?
Hello?
That's unbelievable. There you
Oh,
are.
we got one from Mark.
Take a minute and tell us more about the Leadership Academy. You mentioned this first, but what's the curriculum? What's the drill down? And what are the goals or metrics you wrap within this Leadership Academy pertinent to diversity and inclusion, this whole topic we're talking about today? What
Sure.
do you really do about it?
Yeah, so if you didn't hear the question, what is the Leadership Academy all about in our organization? And we, as I said, we picked 28 people, half physicians, half non-physicians, who we think have tremendous leadership potential. To your question, Mark, it's a mini MBA. The first program was 18 months long. We did it in conjunction with Case Western Reserve University School of Business, and we brought in and augmented that curriculum with a number of people from the outside as well. We shortened the program to a 12-month period of time for 2.0, and that class is currently in process right now. Very similar program, so they learn all types of activities within that program. First of all, it's a voyage of self-discovery, because we find that people are going to be great leaders, need to better understand themselves. And as you know, there's a big difference between being a physician and being a leader of physicians. There's a big difference between being an employee and being a leader of employees. So it's a voyage of self-discovery that we start early, and we screen people appropriately to make sure that we are picking those individuals who have the greatest probability for success. And then it's centered around leadership, it's centered around business development, it's centered around strategic planning, it's centered around business activities. So we have a number of people. I look around the audience. So Chris Connor was one of our faculty, for example, came in and talked about the Sherwin-Williams experience. So we use business models in a teaching way to make sure that people understand the applicability of business to healthcare. And as I said, we've now promoted 10 of that first class of 28 after roughly 18 months of completing that program. 3 of whom are presidents now within our system, which I think is terrific. They've taken responsibility for some of our smaller hospitals. Doctors have moved up to become department chairman. We have another physician who's taken a leadership role within our organization. So we're very pleased about the work that we've done. And frankly, it's geared toward the working professional, for the working professional to step up into our organization, because quite frankly, we don't have enough clinicians, not just physicians, but we don't have enough clinicians in leadership roles. And I think our goal is to make sure that we have people of diverse backgrounds, leadership development, leadership opportunities, and providing those opportunities for growth.
Great. Thanks, Tom. Thank you. Another question? Probably got time for 2 more.
Yes, good morning. So I wanted to back up to a comment about not just checking off the box, but in terms of actually following through. So if I can pose my question from the standpoint of workforce diversity being supplier diversity. And so with the example of the small numbers of underrepresented people who are entering the healthcare field, how do you address, I'll say, the easy option of focusing on gender diversity when the demographic and the other racial diversities are equally important without focusing on quote-unquote targets? How do you balance that? And to be clear, an organization might say, well, we have gender diversity. We had few women, so now we've employed the women. But if a goal is to have more racial diversity, how do you balance that?
Well, I'd be glad if you want me to take it, but I think it was a medical question. I think you hit it head on. I don't think, I've always said that talent recruitment and development is a full contact sport. And we set very specific goals. I think you find that in any organization you're going to get pushback. People don't like to talk about the backside of this, but there is always concern when you say that we think we need to have more females, we need to have more minorities in our workplace. You got to ask yourself the question about how do people who are not minorities and are not females respond to that. And you'd be unrealistic if you didn't admit that there often can be a feeling of, oh my gosh, I think every job in the organization is now going to go to a female or a minority. You've got to be willing to talk about that, and you've got to be willing to talk about, let's look at the marketplace, and let's look at our workforce, and let's look at our customers, and let's look at our suppliers, and how do we look in that overall field. And I think if you can have those kind of adult-to-adult conversations about our need to continue to make progress, I think it helps people through that process. It doesn't solve it, and you're going to have to be willing to have multiple discussions on that. And at the time in your own organization, if you haven't promoted females and you haven't promoted minorities, that the next 3 jobs go to females or minorities, there will be stir in your organization. And I think you just have to recognize that's going to be true, and you better be ready to talk about it, and you better ask people questions. Don't wait till they bring it up. So, the process of adjusting any company or organization, whether it's strategy, whether it's talent, whether it's product or it's geography, it will cause stirs in your organization. It's one of the jobs of all of us as leaders to help people understand why, and to be sure that that conversation is held above the table and not below the table. But so we try to address that as candidly as we can. I think it's a subject leaders have to be willing to step up to. Having said that, as I said before, this is a long journey in this regard, and you're going to have 2 steps forward and 1 step back, and just be prepared that you're going to have part of that in your journey.
I think that was a terrific answer, Cindy, because that was a tougher answer for you than it is for me. 86.4% of the people who work in our health system are female. So gender diversity for hospitals is not so much an issue as it may be in corporate America. But I'd like to answer the question in a little more oblique way. When we get away from gender diversity, I think we need to think a lot about the tactical versus the strategic. And there are a lot of tactical things that we talked about doing today that have a strategic overtone. But to the point about people going into healthcare, there's a very long lead time to become a physician. 4 years generally of undergraduate school, 4 years of medical school, anywhere between 3 to 8 years of additional training. So I'd like you to think about this in the context, though, of what we're trying to do strategically. And strategically, I'm talking about at least a decade. So one of the things that we're doing is we're working very diligently with John Hay High School, right, the STEM school, because we think that that's going to be a great opportunity for high school students to become interested in careers in science, technology, engineering, and medicine. We're obviously interested in the medical component. So we have the Edgar Jackson group, Dr. Edgar Jackson, who was a longtime physician at University Hospitals, who's very active in that program, and appropriately so, and is really working diligently to get diverse students interested in careers in medicine. So we have high school students coming from across the CMSD and private schools working within our organization. They're working on the floors at a certain level. They're not providing clinical care, but they're engaging in the work that we do across our entire health system. They're working in our laboratories in the summertime, for example. Those who are interested in careers in research, we're giving them opportunities as high school students to come in and have the opportunity to learn about medicine and what it's like to become a physician, or to become a PhD researcher, or to become a mathematician who's interested in any number of things that could be applicable to healthcare. So computational biology is a new field that's emerging, and we're trying to get young people interested in those fields. So to the question that you asked, the issue of gender diversity in healthcare is generally, by many measures, a non-issue. That's not so much true in areas of leadership and physician development, however, and that's where we're focusing our efforts. But it's not just about the Leadership Academy and the mentorship program and the stature clerkship and so on and so forth. We're going all the way back to engaging students who are at the ages of 13, 14, 15, 16 to become interested in careers in medicine. And again, it's not going to be happening overnight, but we have to take that the art of the long view on this particular matter, because we have to begin somewhere. It's not an easy process, but it will pay dividends in the long run.
Great. Keeping with the football analogy, I was given the 2-minute warning about a minute ago. So I'm going to give you each about 30 seconds just to anything that you might want to impart, share, closing comments.
Well, I'd make one request. Every one of you who is a commission member, and if you're not a member, please take that step, gets the opportunity every year to fill out the survey. And while I think sometimes the response to looking at the survey is, my gosh, this is a lot of data. I don't think our organization has all this data, so I'm not going to prepare it. I would really commend you to go ahead and fill out the survey. It will provide you with an extraordinary diagnostic about the health of your organization from a diversity and inclusion point of view. If you don't have certain data, it's laying out an area where you really don't know what's going on in your organization. And I then would ask you, by the time you've filled it out, or you've had another team fill it out, read it yourself personally and assess where you personally are going to set your goals for the next year, So use it as an assessment methodology to get a good view of where you are as a company, and we're all trying to improve, or an organization, and then identify what are the 2 or 3 things you're personally going to commit yourself and your organization to get better by next year. Look at that survey next year and see whether you got better. But it's a terrific tool to help you get a really unvarnished look at where you are and where you might consider focusing your improvement actions. So make it work for you. That's what that was intended for. It's not that, very few organizations have every answer that survey asks. That's not the measurement. The measurement is whether it helps you target improvement opportunities.
You heard a couple common themes today. The first is that this is a journey, it's not a destination. Secondly, this is a group of business leaders in the community here in the audience today, and we all remember from Management 101, what gets measured gets managed. I don't think you should be afraid of setting measurement goals, setting your strategy, setting your targets, and living them. And I think that's what Sandy was implying in his message as well. There's nothing wrong with setting targets and expectations for performance and identifying leaders in your organization, and we're going to be taking on that challenge. To the point about not being a box-checking exercise, it's too easy to do that. You can say, well, I tried, but you really need to check the box, I did. And that's a much more challenging opportunity that you have in front of you, but it's one that we need to embrace. We've done it in our organization, and I'm very proud about that, but nonetheless, we still have a long way to go. I think we've only really begun our initiatives in this regard, and there's still a long way that we need to examine carefully and set our strategies appropriately for the future. And I think all of you need to do the same. Again, we're all in this together. This is a relatively small community. We should be learning from each other and doing the kinds of things that we should be doing from learning from best practices, but as well from the strategies that we've all put in place. And then lastly, I would implore again to think about the idea that we need to make today's ceilings tomorrow's floors. And I think once we're able to do that and ingrain the kinds of things that Sandy was talking about into the cultures of our organization, then this will become an important matter for all of us in the communities that we serve and the businesses that we all lead to make sure that we're going to make this a better place to live in Northeast Ohio.
Great. Well, I hope you will all join me in thanking Tom and Sandy for great feedback. Appreciate it.